twice for his murder. Both trials ended with a hung jury. Then on the 28th of August came the largest ever civil rights demonstration. 200,000 marchers in Washington heard Dr. Martin Luther King tell of his dream of an equal and fair non-racial America. But the reality in the South remained violent. 18 days later, the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama was bombed. 4 teenage girls were killed. It was 12 years before the state of Alabama finally indicted Robert E. Chambliss and 2 other renegades from Birmingham's Eastview Clavern for the bombing of the church and the murder of the 4 girls. Throughout 1964, the pressure mounted for full integration in the South. Civil rights workers came from all over the United States to persuade stores to hire black labor and to enroll voters. They followed the precepts of Martin Luther King. He had learned from the success of Gandhi in India in using passive resistance. Moral pressure was applied without violence, while still causing the maximum possible disturbance. Among these volunteers were people like Mickey Schwerner and Andy Goodman, joined by local black activists such as Jim Cheney. They set up freedom schools to teach black people who wanted to pass the literacy test for voting. Mount Zion Church in Longdale was going to house a freedom school until it was burnt down. The 3 activists went to check out the ruins. It was then that they were arrested for speeding, released, and never seen again. Their burned-out station wagon was soon found, but there was no sign of the 3 men. Faced with the indifference of local lawmen, the FBI sent in agents and troops to find out what had happened to them. Frustrated, they scoured the countryside and dragged the rivers. 43 days later, the FBI got a tip that their bodies were buried in an earth dam. They excavated 18 feet down and found them. On the 4th of December, the FBI arrested the sheriff of Neshoba County, his deputy, and 19 others, and charged them with violation of the murdered men's rights. Since murder is a local crime, not a federal one, conspiracy was the only charge that the FBI could bring. Sheriff Lawrence Rainey was confident that he would escape any punishment, and this proved well-founded at first. He and all the defendants were freed, even though one of them confessed. The local court ruled that the confession was inadmissible as evidence. The prosecution tried again, and when they finally came to trial in 1967 at Meridian, Mississippi, the truth behind the Mississippi murders emerged. The trio had been arrested on a prearranged plan to get Mickey Schwerner. They had been held in jail by the deputy sheriff just long enough for the Klansmen to assemble. Then they were allowed to go. They were followed down a highway nearby. Their car was stopped, and they were all shot. When the trial finally ended on the 20th of October 1967, 8 of the accused were acquitted. 3 were released because of a hung jury, and 7 were found guilty. They were immediately freed on a $5,000 bond. But pressure on the clans was now becoming intense, with outspoken speeches by politicians such as Vice President Hubert Humphrey.
For the truth of the matter is, when the dignity of one American is denied, all of us have been denied.
The FBI increased its offensive to infiltrate the ranks of the Klan. Its action brought this response from Sam Bowers, head of the White Knights of Mississippi, who was later to be convicted of the Neshoba killings.
Now, we met here on the basis of a great struggle. The FBI Antichrist system of Nicholas Katzenbach has come in here. They've been harassing us for a long time. They've now made their move to try to bring a group of white Christians, slaughter them on the altar of the Negro Revolution.
On the 7th of June, 1965, James Meredith, whose registration at the University of Mississippi had been such a significant landmark 2.5 years previously, was part of a civil rights march from Memphis, Tennessee to Jackson, Mississippi, to encourage blacks to register as voters. As the march neared the Mississippi town of Hernando, there was a sudden shot and Meredith fell, wounded in the back. Police almost reluctantly arrested a man found carrying a gun by the roadside.
Yeah, right here. You got ammo coming back. Yeah, ammo's thrown it away. Did you shoot Meredith? Nah. You didn't shoot him? What's your name, buddy? Young Laurel. In my car.
James Norval was driven away and the march later resumed. Traditional scenes in the South during the late 1960s belied massive changes which were taking place. Although race riots struck many US cities, the FBI campaign was breaking up the clans. Another major blow to the clans came from an unexpected quarter in 1967, when the House Committee on Un-American Activities sent Robert Shelton to jail for contempt. It condemned the Ku Klux Klan for both its activities and its misuse of funds. Another setback came in 1972, when one of the Klan's most influential friends, Governor George Wallace of Alabama, was speaking at a campaign rally. A gunman named Arthur Bramer, who had been tracking Wallace, got close enough to shoot at point-blank range. Wallace was hit in the stomach, shoulders, arm and spine, and was never able to walk again. Despite the occasional burning cross, it looked by the early 1970s as if the Klan had no function left. Membership dropped and the average age declined as older members died off. It put on the occasional show, but civil rights had ceased to be a massive public issue. Legally, at least, blacks were now the equal of whites throughout America. Even the costumes failed to scare in the sunlight. The Klan fragmented into rival groups, which resorted to tactics of harassment. But despite the threats, the Klan could do little to hold back a steady growth in black confidence. Of the 6 main Klan groups at that time, the largest was Invisible Empire, Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. This was led by David Duke, a graduate of the Nazi-style White People's Party. His approach was to make the Klan look responsible and reasonable. He later abandoned the Klan and ran both for governor of Louisiana and as presidential candidate.
I don't think the challenge will hold up. There's never been a legislative challenge yet. The people, have spoken, as the governor said.
Duke's arch rival in the Klan power struggle was extremist Bill Wilkinson.
And the white people are sticking together. I don't understand it, but I love it.
He rejected Duke's respectable approach, used violent rhetoric, and surrounded himself with armed bodyguards. These tactics meant that for many blacks the threat was still there, as it was for whites such as this woman who was whipped for offending Klan leaders. Then, in 1979, came 2 incidents which seemed to herald a resurgence of the Klans. At Decatur in Alabama, marchers were protesting the conviction for rape of a black youth named Tommy Lee Hines, whom they claimed was retarded and had been falsely convicted. Determined to stop them were members of the Alabama realm of the Invisible Empire, led by the exalted cyclops of the Decatur Klavan, David Kelso. As the marchers reached the shouting Klansmen, the KKK forced a confrontation. Suddenly there was fighting and then a shot. David Kelso, who was wielding a club, was wounded. A black maintenance man, Curtis Robinson, was arrested and later sentenced to 5 years suspended. But he was eventually pardoned on the grounds of self-defense. The Klan used its guns in November 1979, when 2 carloads of Klansmen confronted members of the Communist Workers' Party at Greensboro, North Carolina. Demonstrators who were holding a Death to the Klan rally set upon the cars. Fighting broke out and then shooting, which left 5 demonstrators dead. The Klansmen were acquitted of murder by an all-white jury, but the city of Greensboro had to pay a victim's widow $395,000 because one of their informers had taken an active part. But despite such incidents, the Klan continued its steady decline during the 1980s. In an attempt at respectability, it discarded its secret society image. This member claimed to be an off-duty policeman. Its troubles had multiplied. When it tried to march in the once fertile ground of Montgomery, Alabama, it was stopped by the police because it hadn't applied for a permit. In the past, such niceties had not been bothered about, but these were different days, and Imperial Wizard Bill Wilkinson found himself arrested. 200 Klansmen and Klanswomen were arrested with Wilkinson, and his authority was later destroyed when it was revealed that he had long been an FBI informer. In an effort to modernize and go on the offensive, some chapters of the decimated clans swapped their robes for battle fatigues. They claimed to be preparing for an armed showdown with the radicals and started to look like any other extreme right-wing organization. For all its spectacular displays over more than 100 years and its power to make headlines, the Ku Klux Klan has failed in its main objective of maintaining white supremacy and stopping the march to racial equality. Despite the Klan's murderous savagery, its major effect on the civil rights movement was to hasten the triumph of that cause.
Another double from Great Crimes and Trials begins tomorrow evening at 5 with the disappearance of Union boss Jimmy Hoffa. Coming up, agents from the elite cold case squad of the real NCIS reinvestigate a Marine reported missing 30 years earlier and finally trace a killer.